All right, how's everyone doing this evening?
Good.
I'm Cody with Naughty Viking Custom Woodwork. I met Brian, and well, actually I've known Vince surprisingly for like 20-some years. He knew me since I was a little kid. He lived next door to my babysitter. But I met them at the Annapolis first Sunday event, and they asked me to come out here and speak with you guys just about, mainly about like the finishing process. But really, if you guys have any questions about anything, I'm very transparent with everything I do with my business. So if you have any questions, feel free just to raise your hand at any point. And I even have a mic. I am recording because this will go on my social medias to help push the business. But you know, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But the main aspect with everything you see up here is every piece of wood was hand selected by myself. I go to my lumber yard, Maryland Select Lumbers in La Plata, Maryland. Gentleman named Dennis. I know Coach Andy already knows about him. I'm sure many of you already know about him. Great guy, but I select all my woods from him. But all the woods up here are specifically selected off of three main principles. They're Jenga hardness, so I know I don't have to explain Jenga to any of you because you all pretty much already know. But I look for a hardness level between 800 to 1600. So the reason I personally look for that range is anything softer I find doesn't really hold up to a knife. So you're going to gouge it, you're going to get a bunch of cuts out of it, and then anything harder, it actually damages the knife itself. So you'll start getting chips out of the knife, and you're going to be damaging the knife. Because the big focus that I like to market to customers.
What was that range again?
800 to 1600. Okay. The big thing, one of the big factors I like to push to customers is getting a wood cutting board. You're going to extend the life of your knife. You're not going to have to sharpen it as much. And when you have a nice sharp knife, it's going to be a safer kitchen. So that's one of the stickler points that I tell customers. And then another principle is any woods that naturally have an antimicrobial property. So like cherry, black walnut, all those are pretty much why you see a lot of cherry and black walnut up here. They naturally already have antimicrobial properties, so you're just enhancing that in the kitchen itself. And then the third is closed cell. I'm sure many of you know the difference between closed cell and open cell woods. So like red oak is an open cell. You really shouldn't use red oak for a cutting board because a lot of things get trapped in those cells in that wood, and then you're now cultivating a breeding ground for bacteria. So those are the three principles whenever I look into using a different wood. And there are some exceptions. So like you'll see here, I have some serving trays. All right, so this is black walnut, and this is white wenge. White wenge falls out of that principle of that hardness level. It falls somewhere around the 2200 Jenga scale. But as this isn't a principle of someone typically cutting on, I kind of venture out a little bit more with some of those aspects with that. But as far as all the cutting boards meet all three aspects of those factors. Another one I don't have right now is purple heart. So purple heart's a beautiful wood. A lot of people love it. A lot of people like to use it. There's two reasons why I don't use purple heart in a cutting board, but I will use it in a serving tray or a charcuterie board. One, purple heart is too hard. It falls again into that 2000 Jenga rating. Second, it is food contact safe and not food safe itself. So purple heart dust and stuff can cause allergic reactions in people. So it's just something that I don't venture into the factor of if someone was to somehow cut off a piece of that purple heart and now it's on their food and they eat it, just stick away from that as the aspect. Now, as you can see, there's a couple different styles I have up here. I have some long grains, but my bread and butter are really the end grain boards. I have two of them. This here is actually my personal cutting board for my own home. I bought this for my own kitchen today. This was a pattern I had come up with for myself personally. I had seen someone do another diamond style board, and I was like, ooh, I really like diamonds. I think those will stick out, and I kind of played around with it, and this was the design I had gotten. This was my first attempt at it. So the reason I personally kept it was because I originally tried to make this internal diamond 2 pieces when it actually needed to be 4 pieces where I cut it into quarters. So these points didn't match up completely. I filled it with CA glue and it was perfectly fine for personal use, but not to sell as my business. So I kept this, but I brought this with me today so you guys can see, I process and butcher all my own meats and everything in my home. I've used this board for 2 years. I have never refinished it. So if you've ever been interested in seeing how an end grain board holds up to the test of time, especially with some heavy usage, this is up here. You're more than welcome to grab it and look at it. I can even pass it around if everyone wants to and kind of take a look. But this is some black walnut and cherry, and then I brought the finished product of how I build them now, where you can see the 4 quadrants of the diamond to make those joints match up a lot nicer. So once everything's glued up and you're finally at the end product, this one's always a fun one to point out for multiple glue ups. These are what I like to call my chaos boards. So this board particularly took 2.5 weeks to make. It was a compound of about 8 glue ups. So initially I make 2 separate panels. I take all my offcuts and scrap pieces from my other cutting boards. I glue it up in 2 separate panels because I want to get as much variation in that as possible. So I glue those up, I let them sit for 24 hours. The next day I cut them lengthwise, and now I'm going to get my end grain pattern. I make that as random as possible. And then over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to then alternate between cutting this vertically and horizontally, each alternating day 6 times each time. So I glue this up 8 times, but each time between the glue ups, I cut it 6 different times, either vertically or horizontally, to randomize that pattern as much as possible. And this is what you get. And then I just go ahead and I always alternate the border. So this one currently was Sapel. The last one I did was cherry. I've done black walnut. It's really just whatever I feel would really pull out the color inside the chaos board, but these are huge, popular with customers. Customers love these. It's a true one of a kind. Even if I wanted to, I would never be able to replicate this in a million years.
Why would you want to?
I mean, that's the whole point, right? I genuinely love chaos, and I like the standard randomized patterns. This is one of my biggest sellers. You can see it here. This is just a little bit easier to pick up. This is one of my biggest sellers. I always change out the types of wood I'll use. I've used Paduke and walnut and ash. This one's currently ash, cherry, and black walnut. No matter what wood pattern I use in it, as long as I stick to this stipulation, they sell really quick. I just recently started making these serving trays. I have a couple of them up here for you. All the handles are hand forged by a local blacksmith. So he hand forges all these out of virgin US steel, and then I put these on there with him. But back to the finishing process. Once everything's glued up and sanded, so how I start? Yes, sir.
Did you mention what glue you?
So I use Type Bond 3. So I use Type Bond 3. There's a lot of controversy on which one you want to use and everything like that. The biggest stipulation I've ever heard about why not to use Type Bond 3, why to use Type Bond 2, is that a lot of people argue that Type Bond 3 isn't as heat resistant, that when it gets hot, it expands a little bit more and it cracks, whereas Type Bond 2, you have a little bit more flexibility. I've tested that. I've literally put boards in my oven at 300 degrees to really put that in the variable. I've never had that issue. Not to say someone might not have ever had that issue, but me personally, I've never had that issue. I think the big factor comes into play that a lot of the woodworkers out there now, they're trying to pump so much stuff out, and they'll only clamp up for the minimum time that Type Bond recommends, which is 3 hours. But then it also stipulates don't stress the joint for another 24 hours, and they're immediately going into working that. Whereas I use full panel clamps. So I personally use Jorgensen. I've tried Bessie. There's tons of panel clamps out there, but they're holding up to 1,500 pounds of pressure. And these boards will live in that clamp. And I use 5 for every glue up. It doesn't matter how big or small. 5 clamps, and they'll sit in there and live in there for 24 hours. And they will not be touched. They will not be moved. So I think that's the bigger aspect, is the guys that are stressing the joints in between the setting of the glues. Because I've talked to other guys and they've had similar aspects where they've never had an issue. Yes, sir.
How do you flatten after the glue?
So I use a planer, and I know that's going to be controversial because putting an end grain through a planer, right? So I found the trick is to take a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. You want it to at least be 1/4 inch minimum. Round over on the back side of whatever board you're putting through, and you're going to prevent that from snagging. Now the only exception I've ever had was this board, and it came down to just because it was thinner. So all my end grain boards are going to be 2 inches thick. So anything I classify as a cutting board for my business personally is going to be anywhere from 1.5 inches thick to 2.25 inches thick. Anything less than that I classify as a charcuterie board. And that's not to say that it can't be used as a cutting board. That's just personally how I run my business, because my goal is to have this be passed down to people's children and their grandchildren, everything like this. I'm selling an heirloom piece that your grandchildren could go, my grandparents cut on this, my grandparents used this in their kitchen. I'm trying to bring that aspect back to people's homes and their families that used to be a normal aspect. My father's family's from Tennessee. I still have cast irons my great-great-grandma cooked on in the 1800s. So that's kind of more the aspect of why I target towards that. So the only issue I ever had was this one. This one used to be 16 inches long. Went through the planer, it no longer was 16 inches. But other than that, typically, if you use a round over bit, round over the backside, you won't get any tear out or snag or anything like that. My workshop is very small. My goal is, I'm actually in the process right now working on a business loan to build a bigger facility where I can have a router sled and flat it through the router sleds. But right now, my workshop is 24 foot long by 12 foot wide. A workshop I run 100-foot extension cord from my house. All these boards were built on a $100 Craftsman job site table saw. So you don't need some big $5,000 table saw or anything to make any of these.
How wide is your planer?
My planer's a 13 inch. I just have the DeWalt.
And that just barely fits.
That barely fits. I had to trim it up a little bit to make it work. So, but yes, yeah. So my planer's 13 inches. I have the DeWalt 735, I think is what it is. But all my sanding after planing starts at 80 grit. Don't care. I take it all the way back to 80 grit. And then after 80 grit, I go 120. And then I do 150, 180. And at 180 is when I'll do all the roundovers for my corners. And the reason I do the roundover at 180 is because I've found if I try to do it early, I misshape the corners. They're not as even. So what I like to do is I like to do 180 because I'll do 180, sand over any of the snags on the corners, especially on the end grains. A lot of them do a little bit of snag. The 180 is aggressive enough to help smooth that over. Then I'll do the 220, hit that with the 220, and then after 220, I water pop everything. So what I do is I spray it with water. The reason I spray it with water is I want that grain to stand up. So when you're sanding, you're taking off layers of grain. So at a certain point, you're now pushing that grain to lay flat. And what happens is when it comes in contact with water, which obviously all these are built to come in contact with water because you want to wash them at some point in time, right? That grain's going to then stand up. So water popping at 220 allows that grain to stand up in my workshop, and then I go back with 320 and I do a light sanding to get rid of all that grain that kind of feels like hairs off there, so you get a truly smooth finish. Yes, sir.
Using a drum sander or what?
I hand sand everything.
Hand sand.
I don't have power for a drum sander. I got a DeWalt $70 hand sander. Look, there ain't nothing fancy going on over here, I promise you. Maybe one day, but not any day soon. So I stand at 320 and that's where I stop. After the 320, and I forgot to mention, in between the 220 and 320, I'm going to do my hot brand. So I went to custombrandshop.com sent them my image, they sent me a brass brand, I heat it up with a propane torch, and push it on. I don't own the laser, I don't own the CNC, everything is done as much as possible by hand as possible. So after the 320, yes sir.
Yeah, going back to your pre, before you run it through the thickness
plane.
planer, yeah.
Yep.
You round over the edges
Yep, so,
On the backside.
on the backside.
so say this is the front side going into the planer.
Yeah.
I'll round over this back edge with at least a 1/4 inch round over, if not a 1/2 inch.
Oh,
The more
okay.
round you can make that, the better.
Okay, so going in, okay. I got
Yep.
it. All right, gotcha.
Yes, sir.
Your planer and helical,
I just have a straight blade.
straight blade?
Yeah, I just have a straight blade. I don't, it doesn't make sense, I keep looking at the Helix, but at the same time, I'm like, $600 to put a cutter head and a $600 planer, when I can just buy, because my goal is I want to get a 20-inch planer. Because I want to eventually make like 32-inch by 20-inch boards. Some of them got, like I like barbecuing, I love barbecuing. Some of these boards do fit big briskets on it, but some of them guys do whole hind quarters, stuff like that. So my goal is to eventually get a 20-inch wide, so I can do 32 by 20-inch boards a lot faster. Right now, I'm kind of doing those with a ghetto rigged router set. I took some, like, we got a new bed, I took some of the old bed planks, glued them up into an L shape and just hovered over it. Like I said, nothing fancy's going on around here. But after the 320, these are going to take an overnight bath in the mineral oil. I dunk every single board in the mineral oil, and then I just set up a drying rack over the mineral oil tub. Just let it drip dry overnight, let that wood absorb as much of that mineral oil as it absolutely wants. The next day I'm going to come back, and this is the next small business I support. I make all this myself in small batches in my own kitchen. The small business I support is a local beekeeper. All my beeswax comes from Soul Nectar Farms in St. Leonard. It's literally listed on the label on the very bottom. He doesn't use any insecticides or pesticides on his bees. He doesn't use any paraffins in his beehives. So it's all 100% natural beeswax. I know it's natural because I have to process the bee comb out of it when I melt it down in my house, and then I combine that with coconut oil and mineral oil. And that's what's going to truly be the final finish for all these boards after they get the mineral oil bath. And this is what I sell to customers to maintain that finish over a period of time. I played with a couple of different ingredients. I played with a couple of different formulas. This was the formula I ended up fully liking. I've given it to woodworkers. I had them test it out for me, everything to get unbiased opinions. And they, to this day, I still have 10 woodworkers that come and buy it from me in bulk. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
I just recently made 2 charcuterie boards
Okay.
out of solid planks.
Yep.
One was cherry, about 4 foot long. One was maple, about 2.5 foot long.
Okay.
And I did the mineral oil
Yep.
treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Only one really good strong coat. And took it, and somebody else was supplying the ingredients. They put all the stuff out, and one of them was berries.
Berries.
Yeah, you know, like raspberries or
Oh,
blackberries
it's
or
stained.
whatever. I don't know. So,
Yep.
And it stinks.
Yep.
How am I going to get rid of that stink?
Sand it.
Just sand it? That's all.
Sand it. I mean, that's why I have the beeswax in here. So my wife literally has stolen 5 of my charcuterie boards. I'm not kidding you. This is my only cutting board I've taken from my own business, right? That's my cutting board. My wife's stolen 5 charcuterie boards. She goes, yeah, that's too nice to sell. I literally have a pile of them. I was like, maybe I should bring some of these. I didn't decide to. But she stole 5 of my charcuterie boards. My wife loves charcuterie. She lived in Germany for 6 years. Germans are huge on charcuterie, if no one knew that. So she does all the weird cheeses and berries. I can promise you we've never gotten a stain on any of them. The only time I've ever had an issue was my mother-in-law put a metal can that was wet on the board, and it left a little ring right here, and you can barely even see it. But that's the only time I ever had an issue
How would you get that ring out?
sand it,
Sand it again?
sand it, just refinish it. But this is my personal one, I don't care.
I don't know.
It don't make no difference to me, but, so what I always tell customers is, so that board, like I said, is 2 years old, I've used it heavily, but I always tell customers, when your board is ready to be refurbished, message me, I'll refinish it for you for 50 bucks. So I'll refinish it for 50 bucks, you send it to me, whether you need to ship it to me or we need to meet up and pick it up. I'll refinish it for 50 bucks. I'll sand it all the way back down, I'll do the water pop, I'll redo everything, I'll do the mineral oil, I'll give you the same finish that I had the day that it came. Am I making money off that at 50 bucks? No. But it's a peace of mind I'm giving to my customers that I'm going to stand behind my product. I literally had a board in my hand tonight that I wanted to bring to you guys, and I set it down, I tried to grab it. It was the first cutting board I ever sold. My client put it on their gas stove, their kid came over, turned the gas stove on, it lit the bottom on fire. I saved it. Perfectly fine.
It's only half an inch thick though.
No! So that is
Ran through the cleaner 5 or 6 times and it was fine.
yeah, so it is actually still within my spectrum of the 1.5 inch to 2.5 inch, 2.25 inches thick. Because I had finished that one, it was just shy of 2 inches. So after planing off enough bottom that I felt secure enough that it was secure, it still was at like 1 5/8 inches. So, but I mean the whole bottom was on fire.
Right.
Like it was
Charred.
It was charred.
Well,
so back to the Type Bond 3 with, you know, people are saying it cracks and separates and stuff on high heat. I don't know how much more high heat you need than being caught on fire. But it did separate. It's still together. I gotta ship it back to her tomorrow. So that's all. Yes, sir.
Your beeswax, coconut oil, and mineral oil, is that 1:1:1 ratio?
No,
Secret formula.
it's secret formula.
Okay.
But no, it is not. It actually, I've used very little mineral oil in it. I really only just use the mineral oil in it for the viscosity, for the ease of spreadability, and to prevent it helps prevent the coconut oil and the mineral and the beeswax from separating. So other than that, it's pretty much just primarily beeswax. I mean, it is. So I don't know if you guys have ever used. It's kind of frozen, but you see, it's more on like the paste side, cream side. Total Boat makes a wood honey, and that was the epitome of why I started my own product. Because Total Boat sells the wood honey, and it's supposed to be beeswax and mineral oil, and that's it. And it's supposed to primarily be beeswax. But you can pour it out like it's a liquid. I'm sure many of you have worked with beeswax. Unless you heat it, it is not a liquid. And it was bright yellow. And I can tell you right now, I work with a lot of beeswax. Beeswax is not a bright yellow. It's more of like a beige, off-white color.
How do you apply that?
So you just take it literally has instructions on the back. So if it is somewhat separated, because if your house gets above 78 degrees, it will separate a little bit, just shake it. Well, I really like to put it in the microwave for like 30 seconds, just take the lid off, throw it in the microwave for 30 seconds. Take a paper towel, microfiber cloth, just wipe on any, to where you want to see some light swirling. Nothing too crazy, you don't need to cake it on, I promise you it doesn't. Just let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes. Come back to it. If you see that there are no swirls left, go ahead and apply a little bit more. The wood probably needs a little bit more. If you still see some light swirling, go ahead and wipe off any excess and you're good to go. You only need to do it once a month. My board probably gets it once every 3 months. So it's just like a carpenter, right? Your house is the last one to get worked on. My board's the last one to get worked on. Yes, sir.
Did you say you submerged the board
And mineral oil.
mineral oil for
Yep.
a day?
No. So I submerge it in mineral oil and I set it on a drying rack to drip dry.
You don't leave it.
I do not leave it submerged. You will saturate that board so far that it'll drain mineral oil for a year if you submerge it overnight. Yeah, no. So I dunk it. I do a quick dunk, and then I pick it up and I set it on a drying rack and it just drip dries overnight. So that way it just lets the wood absorb as much as it wants, it gets a deeper penetration. And then I put this on just to seal all that into it.
How long do you wait between the mineral oil and you applying the wax?
12 to 24 hours.
Does it make a difference when you make an in-grain cutting board as to which way you run it through the planer?
No,
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 okay.
no.
When we make an in-grain cutting board, we build a frame around it so that when it goes through, it won't tear up.
Right, so that's what I was talking about, is rounding over the back edge with a 1/4 inch round over to a 1/2 inch round over. It prevents that tear out, I don't have to do a frame. So I've seen a lot of people do a lot of crazy things. I've seen people glue on a piece of solid wood on the back to be the sacrificial piece, the frame.
So what you're saying is if you round it over beforehand, you don't have to build a frame.
No, sir. So I've done all the crazy things. I did the sacrificial glue, I've done the frame. This is the easiest way. You take a round over.
Do you make it a little bit longer, you round it over, run it through, and do you cut that round over off?
No. So once you put, because typically what I do is I'll just use a 1/4 inch round over, because that's what all my profiles are.
So you'll just finish it round?
I'll just finish my round over, because it's going to get flat as you go through, right? So at the end, I just take my 1/4 inch round over and just finish
You
off the
would
round.
probably rip it off if you get a little tear out.
Yeah, but it's very rare. Typically what happens is if you see the round overs half crested, go ahead and readdress it. So if you can find me on TikTok and everything like that, you'll probably see videos where my router's literally running next to my planer, because I just don't bother turning it off. It just sits there on my table saw, and when it goes half crested, I just grab it, round it back over, throw it back in. Because I was finding that if I did go beyond that half crest, that you had the potential for small tear out. So just keeping that 1/4 inch round over a half crest and above, you're not going to get any tear out. So 9 times out of 10, I don't have that issue.
Next question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, when you go to make the cutting board, you're making a brick cutting board. Do you use in-grain as the mortar?
Yes.
Or do you use the fat grain?
End grain. So I have played around with doing end grain with long grain. You should not do it. It's a stereotypical thing. A lot of people say it's not true, it's not this, it's not that. I thought so too at first, and then I played around with it more. I applied it to more heat, more cold, stuff like that. You are going to get 2 different expansion and contractions, and at some point, those 2 pieces will separate. Whether it's a year, 2 years, it will eventually separate. I promise you. I put it through extreme testing. It's not pleasant because it's not a small separation. It separates because those 2 woods just don't want to. Their expansion and contraction, and eventually it breaks. So I literally took it from the oven, put it in the freezer, and created extreme expansion and contractions in it to simulate the long period of time.
Your expansion is across the long grain, so if one's going this way, the other's
Going that way, right? Yeah, it every time it separates, and it's not a pleasant separation. You know, sometimes you'll get like small separations. It's not the end of the world, whatever. No, these things are like you see daylight film. So, yes, sir.
Your 735, is that straight blade or helical cutter?
Straight blade. Yeah.
Carbide or
Yes.
steel?
Carbide. Yes, sir.
I've got it. The Typon 2 is better than the Typon 3. Typon 2 will come out in the wash on your t-shirt.
I mean, what do I care about that?
Once you get type on 3 on your clothes, it's tough to get it off.
No, I know. I could have worn jeans. I literally have Type on 3 all down it. Why do I care? Like, what? I'm not at a fashion show. No offense. I'm not. Just, I have work clothes.
You just wear the same jeans.
I wear the same jeans. And then when they get torn, I go buy a new pair at BJ's for $10, and the same thing happens to those.
What about moisture content?
Anything, my ideal is 7%. So I know where you're going with that.
So
Cause
you-
I've dried my own woods too before, 7%.
Do you test it?
Yeah,
What tester do you use?
I just use, what was it?
Pin type or?
I don't use a pin, it's just a surface one. And then I just have a calculator that bases it, because it does softwood or hardwood, but they don't ever tell you what hardwood it does. So I do the softwood, and then I just do a calculation based off of the wood density to get what moisture that's reading off of there. 7% is my ideal range within that, especially with these guys, because you're getting, like, could you imagine if I had any expansion or contraction happening in this because of drying? Like this,
Yeah, chaos.
yeah, it would give a new meaning to the chaos, like, so 7%.
It would be a colander.
Yeah. It might be a nice little fruit bowl. It might, if the corners go up nice, it might be a nice little fruit bowl too, you know, so.
So 7% in Maryland is kind of hard to find.
So, what I like to do is, I get it from Maryland Select Hardwoods. His typically runs around 10, 12%. And then I have drying racks in my shop I'll set it up on and just let it dry up there for a period of time.
Air dry?
Yeah, just air dry.
How long does it take?
Usually it's not too long. As long as the humidity
That's
level.
arbitrary. What's?
Again, it's arbitrary. Is the humidity 92% outside, or is it, 40%? It takes a factor. If the humidity is higher, I'll take one of my heaters and just run my heater on there. Anyone else? I think I pretty much. Here. Yes, sir.
Do you use a frame to cut your juice?
Yes, I built it myself.
Okay.
So I just built it to factor what my distance for my router was. I literally just built a bigger one to be able to do like super ginormous cutting boards. I had someone ask me for, I think it was a 40 by 26 or something. So I'm able to do that bigger one now. And I use a 3 horsepower router now where I used to use the Bosch like Colt 1.5. So I had to make a new one. What I like to do is I will take, I just make it out of poplar or pine. My current one is poplar because it's cheap and it's just readily available. But what I'll do is I'll take like a 6-inch board and then I'll rip it in half and then I'll glue them together and those will give me my sides. But I glue the grains to where they're facing each other so if they go to warp, they warp into each other so it's always straight. That way I don't have, because the past one I had made for smaller ones, I only done single piece wood and it had like expanded and contracted and kind of got out of alignment a little bit. The new one, I took it 1x6, cut it in half, flipped it to mirror so the grains, when they go to expand and contract, they contract into each other. So that way they stay as straight as possible. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm kind of the ePay guy in the group here. Have you ever used ePay? Engram for a cut board?
Way too hard.
Well, nothing's too hard.
That was literally the first thing I covered.
Was it? I missed it.
Because it will damage your knife. So the Jacob rating I look for is 800 to
Oh, it's
1600.
ridiculous. I know. Yeah. It's
So
absurd.
we're looking at what, 3200 is ePay? Something 2800, 3200, something. You're cutting on steel. You might as well go buy a piece of granite when all those people were buying granite and cut on them and were wondering why their knives were breaking in half. Like, Vince, you had your hand up?
How long have you been doing this?
So, the business, 2 years. So, the reason I got into this was 2 reasons. One, my mom was one of the first MHIC women, one of the first women in the state of Maryland to get her MHIC license. So I grew up on the weekends going to work with her carpenters. That's how I learned how to work tools. My mom has pictures of me at 4 or 5 years old running shingles on a 1210 pitch. Like, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. 5 years old, running
Your mom
shoes.
didn't like you very much.
Well, you know, they would run like 2x4s and they would run straps and like.
Yeah,
you know.
right.
There was once or twice that I was dangling that he's holding me back out by the rope, you know. But so I grew up just doing woodworking, and I always loved it. It was always a passion. Middle school wood shop. I actually ran an underground business. The guys that weren't very good at it, they would pay me $20. I would take their project home and I'd finish it in my business, in my house, right? So, as an adult, I had a couple of various jobs. I worked construction for a long period of time, but I was born with left hemiplegic cerebral palsy. So I have cerebral palsy on my entire left side of my body. That was pretty brutal on my body, especially since I've torn this hip flexor. I've blown this knee out. I have no cartilage left in my left knee. So I went into sales. So I went into sales for 84 Lumber for a period of time, and then in 2018, I nearly died. I went into the hospital at 240 pounds, 13% body fat. I was really into lifting weights, and within a month, I lost 100 pounds. I had a priest come read me my last rites and tell me I probably would not make it through the morning. And that I needed to call whoever I needed to call to and say my goodbyes. I was in the hospital for 3 months at Johns Hopkins. Finally left Johns Hopkins at 143 pounds. If you go to my website, you'll see pictures on my bio of me outside. Brian can attest to this, of me walking around Johns Hopkins with an IV, and I look like I'm going to a Halloween party dressed as Jesus. So the next couple of years, I was in and out of the hospital. I couldn't really do a lot. I had no muscle structure anymore. The next couple of years, I had to have multiple blood transfusions to save my life. I slept a lot. I was on various medications that I just couldn't work on. So once I got my health back under control, my wife came to me and was like, you know, when you worked sales, you were never home. You go where you need to make a sale, right? You work weekends, you work nights, you work days, whatever. She's like, why don't we start a business? You know, we have a couple $1,000 saved up. Let's start a business. What the hell are we going to do? Like, a couple $1,000, you don't really start a business with that. But I went back to my passions. I love to cook, and I love woodworking. And so, we live in a time when everybody wants to live in a disposable lifestyle, right? What can I buy for the cheapest and throw it away in a year and buy a new one? So I wanted to combine my two passions. I love to cook and I love to do woodworking, so I decided to start my cutting board business. It literally just started as cutting boards. I have tons of various products now. I make spatulas. I even make kids Montessori sets for kids to learn how to cook in kitchens, everything like that. But the big aspect was to take plastic out of people's kitchens and give them an all-natural alternative option that they know is completely safe and for them and their families. Being someone that had their body turn against them, because the reason I almost died was a very rare form of colitis, where my colon literally tried to kill me. It was something very true and dear to me. And growing up with a mom that was a single mom with 2 boys, that went a lot of thrift stores and antique shops, I grew up seeing the old butcher blocks in the antique shops. And I was like, I want to build those. I want to make a more modern aspect of the butcher blocks back to making a family heirloom for people's homes that they can pass down through their generations, refinish it, and it still be as beautiful as the day that their great-grandmother bought it. And that was the aspect that brought me to bring my business. So as far as business-wise, we've been in business for 2 years. But I've been doing woodworking pretty much my entire life.
Where do you typically sell from?
So various events. That's my big one. I'm trying to build my e-commerce right now, hence why I'm recording the post on TikTok, YouTube, everything like that. But right now I do a lot of business. Like I said, Vince and Brian met me at the Annapolis first Sunday. I'll be at the Mosaic District in April. We were at Dulles, Fairfax, Occoquan, just various craft and arts events. We typically do a lot in Northern Virginia, just let's be honest, they have the money.
Yep. That's why Jesse James robbed banks.
Right.
That's where the money was.
Yeah, that's where they kept the money. Look, trust me, if they held the money still at the banks, I might be Jesse James. All right. Anybody else?
I was gonna ask you, where do you get the inspiration for some of your patterns, really? I love the random one, by the way, the chaos, whatever.
I'm borderline autistic.
Easy. How many fish sticks?
Yeah, right. Chicken nuggets are like a daily staple of my life. But no, and honestly, it's just.
But it's like seeing things, you said you went to a lot of thrift shops and stuff.
Yeah.
Are like things come from those memories, or just more or less you developed your kind of own style?
I kind of just developed my own style. Sometimes, so this board down here, I had seen one, actually on a cooking channel, that was similar to this. They pretty much just using like cherry, but they had made these like 1x into 2x cubes, and then they were randomized, but it was all one type of wood. I was like, that'd be really cool to do like 3 different woods and do 3 different glue ups and then cut them into cubes and rotate them. So this one's pretty popular too. This is my 3rd variation of this. This was actually a custom order for my wife's cousin. She really liked that. And we went through the woods, and this is it. This one, I had seen someone doing diamonds, a different type of diamond pattern. And I was like, I wonder if I could do like a diamond and a diamond and a diamond. And I could kind of see it, but I couldn't really run. But I was like, I'll run with it. And like I said, this is the first one I made, which is my personal cutting board. There was a little bit of a failure, but I knew it was close enough that that I could tweak it from there. This board here, honestly, I can't even tell you why. I almost burnt that board here. So what had happened was, so someone had told me about, because all my boards are solid. So these patterns are all the way through. If you cut this in half, it's always the same thing. There's no core, anything like that. So someone had, for some reason, I decided to listen to someone. And they had told me about this technique that people do where they'll take like the 8-quarter board and take their miter saw and cut angles in it, but leave the bottom attached and then like inlay things. And then they'll flip it over and they'll plane off the back, and then it's all the way through. I tried that and I hated it so much. I literally burnt that board because it was just so bad. You couldn't maintain the glue up. Your joints just were they were horrendous. But I liked the principle behind it. So that's where this came from, was that kind of aspect. But then I was like, you know what? It'd be really cool if I took one solid piece of cherry and matched all the grain all the way through, and then kind of made it look like the walnut, like spread through the cherry and made these like random diamond patterns. But what I forgot to calculate was when you add something in an angle and you cut it all the way through, it expands. So my glue up was all over the place. I had like 20 clamps on this thing trying to hold it together in all different directions and cussing up a storm. And mind you, I don't have a glue up table. I'm doing this on the floor. And this thing, like halfway through, I go inside and I'm like, dear, I think I'm throwing in the towel on this one. I was like, I don't think this thing's going to come out anywhere near where I want it to. And she's like, just see it through. She was like, just see it through. You're already halfway through. Just get there. And so by the time I got done, this thing was like this wide on one end, and it was all kind of crazy. But I saw it and I took a square, like a big framing square, and I just drew a square, and I cut it up, and then I put my walnut border on it. I made my own spline jig. I splined all the corners with cherry, so it looks like the cherry's now coming through the walnut, and stuff like that. I had a really cool tea box I wanted to bring you guys, but unfortunately it sold and the client wanted it sooner than what I could have prolonged this from doing. But it was a really cool black one-bud tea box, and I did match grain all the way around this box. And if you want to see it, I have pictures of it. But when I envisioned this, I was like, why keep it one-dimensional, right? It's a tea box, but why keep it just as a tea box? So every divider, not only was solid black limbo that I hand planed to get an eighth of an inch down, I also made them so they were removable. So you could customize the compartment, so it would either be 5 individual compartments, 2 individual compartments, or 1 solid individual compartment. And all the corners on that were splined with walnut and everything like that. I just let the wood really speak to me. I never worked with black limbo before. I saw it at Maryland Select Hardwoods. Like, this is some really pretty wood. To me, it's basically what everybody wants out of spalted or anniversary of maple. You have all the variation of color, you have a little bit of orange in it, and I just kind of was like, let's see what happens, and somehow I ended up making a 2-box and it ended up selling. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just, I like the wood like this one here. It's funny enough, if you said you go see Dennis, right? So you know Dennis, he'll throw pieces of wood away, right?
Yeah.
Or he'll try to give them to you. And I always pay him some money for them, but this was one of those pieces. So what happened was, if you come look at it closer, there is a glue joint right here. What had happened was, this was the length piece over here, but the back end was termite infested. But it had been killed drying, there was no more insects in it, but he saw it as a wasted piece of wood. And I was like, Dennis, what are you doing with this piece of wood? He's like, I'm about to go burn it. I said, no you ain't. He's like, you want it? I was like, yeah, I want it. And he's like, I was like, Dennis, I'll give you $30 for it. But I immediately took it home, because this right here. I saw that burl, and I knew exactly what was going to be under it once I planed it and everything like that. I just let the wood speak to me, and whatever is going on with the wood. Now, like I said, there are certain patterns, like these guys here, and then this board right here is a standard pattern. My 13-year-old son makes this. This is his pattern. This is the way I'm building him up. He now wants to take over this pattern, but this is his pattern. So these are just some set standard patterns that I just let you do. I really like cherry and sapel together, but we'll also do black walnut and maple. So black walnut and maple, you can never go wrong with. Someone's going to buy it. But as far as that, I mean, it's just letting the wood talk to you. Yeah.
Can you show your personal board right now again? And tell us how many times you've refinished that?
I haven't refinished it at all.
You haven't at all?
No. Because you haven't seen it yet. I haven't refinished it once.
Incredible.
So like I was saying, you can see where like the joints didn't match up properly, and I just filled it with some CA glue, which I wouldn't sell it to a customer. That's why I personally kept it. But yeah, I've never refinished it. If you like pick it up and like hold it in the angles of the light, you'll see some of the cut marks on it. But I've used meat cleavers on that thing, chef knives.
Wow. When you do the juice group, you go one time?
I do 3 passes.
3, okay.
I do 3 passes.
That thing will walk on you.
Yeah, it will.
What was your question?
So when I do the juice group, how many passes do I do it in?
Oh, yeah.
Because especially when you're doing end grain, and the biggest one that'll do it is white oak. White oak will send your bit all the way through the other side before you even blink an eye. So white oak I'll typically do in 5 passes. If I have any white oak in it, I'll typically do 5 passes, especially if it's quarter sawn white oak. But typically I do it in 3. So I have my steps on my router set up that literally that's just doom and just pass it through.
Okay.
So for what you're selling, what percentage is end grain and what is flat grain?
So
I guess it depends a little bit on the product, right?
I would say 80% is probably end grain and 20% is long grain. Other than my son's board and that black walnut board, like I've sat on this one for probably a year. End grain, I typically don't sit on. Typically end grain, 1, 2, 3 events, they're gone. Long grain, you can sit on them a little bit longer. I just really do long grain just for a price point factor. I guess that's another thing we can touch on is, anybody want me to touch on like pricing?
Sure. Yes.
All right. So, how I do my pricing is, there's a formula, and you might wanna write it down, but if not, you can always email me and I'll tell you it again. So how I do my pricing is, I do price of material. So let's say like this guy right here. Right? $40, or I'm just gonna do this so it's easier in my head. Then I can make it easier in my head. So $25 for wood, we'll say $15 for the handles, but they're actually $25 if anyone's wondering, because I do have these hand forged. So that comes to $40 worth of material for this. Takes 2 hours to make, $30 an hour, $60. My total expense is $100. So that's my starting point. $100. Then how I do it is plus 15% for overhead expenditure, sandpaper, wood glue, things like that. So then we're at $115, right? And then after that, then I add another 20% for profit, all right? So then you're looking at, what, 100, so you're at $140 now. And then I add 15% on top of that for selling expenses, shipping material, vendor events, you know, it's not free to go to events. Website hosting, aspects like that, and that's what I get my ultimate price from. Obviously, this board is not $160, it's like $245, but just for easier numbers to play with. But that's my pricing formula that I work with, and I'll adjust it every now and then. Whether, like this board, obviously isn't $800. It took me 2.5 weeks to make. I sell this particular one for $375. The bigger ones will be a little bit more, but the most expensive board I sell is this guy and what I call my basket weave board. I don't actually have that with me right now. I sold out of those, but they're only priced at $500. So that's the most expensive I'm willing to go. Because, like I said, I'm trying to make a product that as many people as possible can afford without having to go without groceries. They need to use them, and they have to have groceries to use them. So, anybody else? No? All right.
Thank you.